So it seems that the Mummy franchise is apparently being brought back from the dead like some sort of mummy. And I, for one, cannot wait. These movies were the most popular and relevant mummies have been in Hollywood since the 1930s and 40s. Which makes sense, as they were made to be pseudo-remakes of those classic films. Though I think it would be more accurate to call them complete reimaginings that revitalized the Dead brand. No pun intended. Reimaginings that went so far in their own route that they became something else entirely. So much so that the lead character is no longer the titular character, but rather the adventurer he went up against. And anytime there's been talks or even the slightest inkling of a Mummy remake, it's this trilogy that fans hold it to, not the original set of horror movies that inspired these. I would even argue that the follow-up attempts at resurrecting the now-dead franchise have taken inspiration from this set of films, hoping to find similar success. But instead, they only found failure in trying to recreate what can't be duplicated. This retelling of the tale took what was a traditional horror story and added an adventurous flair, while putting less emphasis on trying to scare an audience, and more effort into trying to captivate one. While there are definitely still horror elements attached to the once horror franchise, it's now focused primarily on action sequences and gags. So despite its name, this trilogy actually has a lot more in common with Indiana Jones than it does the 1940s films. And believe it or not, that's actually not really a complaint for me. Actually, it's almost a compliment. This franchise has its own distinct identity, one that let it stand out from other remakes, which I think is why it's more fondly remembered and beloved than a lot of the other attempts at recreating universal horror monsters. But by no means are these movies perfect. The romance is rushed, the special effects are dated, and were even horribly distracting at the time when they came out. I mean, seriously, the less said about PS2 rock, the better. Even some of the standard effects, I would argue, are pretty crummy. Again, no pun intended. Not to mention that it suffers from the X-Men franchise problem, where despite going through decades, nobody ever seems to age. Unless they were a child at one point in time. I mean, Brendan Fraser is 40, but his character is pushing 60 in the last movie. There are definitely elements that are a product of its time, and being as such, haven't necessarily aged well. But most of, if not all of that, is completely forgivable when compared to all this series did well. Interesting, expansive set pieces, fun and clever gags utilizing the location and time period, fight scenes and action sequences worth a rewatch, and stories that seamlessly transition between serious, scary, and silly. There's a lot more to love compared to all there is to critique. The first Mummy movie follows adventurer Rick O'Connell, as he's freed from Cario prison by two Egyptologists, Evelyn and Jonathan Carahan, who want him to lead them to the lost city of the dead. But on their expedition, they release an otherworldly horror that looks to destroy all that it comes across. A resurrected priest Imhotep mistakes Evelyn with his long-lost love, and takes her captive. But in the end, in spite of their best efforts, Rick manages to rescue her and somehow save the day, and get the girl. Though the mummy would return, however, in the very appropriately named, The Mummy Returns. A sequel made just 2 years after the first, but took place 7 years later. And despite it feeling very much the same, it also did enough different. For starters, this time around Rick and Evelyn are now parents, and their son Alex is equally adventurous to their chagrin. This kid accidentally nearly winds up kickstarting the apocalypse when he finds the bracelet of Anubis, which acts as the start of a journey to unlock the Scorpion King's tomb, and should the bracelet wearer not find the tomb, he will find his end and end up in a tomb. Or I guess, a grave in this case. But, you know, I couldn't let that clever wordplay pass me by, even if it wasn't all that clever. Or wordplay. At the same time, Imhotep is resurrected once more using the Book of the Dead. Now these two long-dead dead men live again to go into battle in an effort to control Anubis' army, and with it, the world. Upon resurrecting, Imhotep reunites with the reincarnation of his would-be wife. And it's also revealed that Evelyn is in actuality the reincarnated Princess Nefertiti, the daughter of the pharaoh and the protector of the Bracelet of Anubis. Which kind of makes it weird that Imhotep would mistake her for his wife in the last movie, but yeah, okay, alright. There's a lot going on in this one, and in a less than stellar movie, it would probably feel like far too much. But here, these plot points aren't juggled masterfully. They're perfectly synced together. It is equal parts comedy as it is adventure, and I would argue that it's more grandiose and greater than the first one. So, I don't think it's a mystery for most fans where and when the franchise started to fail. This series hit a serious decline in its final installment, which is also more than likely why it was in fact its final installment. There was never a plan in place to make this last Mummy movie the last Mummy movie. As a matter of fact, when researching this, I found out that some of the actors signed on to The Mummy 3 did so with the promise of 2 to 3 picture deals. The third film is significantly different from its predecessors. While the first 2 films felt like they followed each other fairly well, this one feels different and disconnected. It's the first and only installment to not include the titular mummy, which feels a little bit off in a series titled The Mummy. I will say it's an inspired choice to change things up and take the characters into a new setting. It was smart to introduce the intricacies of a new culture. I can't really fault them for that. But again, this was a mummy movie without the mummy. Its story doesn't feel like a natural continuation of the last 2. Instead, it's a brand new journey starring some of the same characters, but even less of the same actors. Even worse than a mummy movie without the mummy was that this was a movie without an actual actor as the antagonist. In spite of getting second top billing, Jet Li wasn't available for most of the shoot, despite him being the movie's big bad. The main threat was almost never there. So instead, he was replaced with a CGI model. Because, that worked so well in the second movie. We all love PlayStation Dwayne Johnson, right? So we have a villain who isn't even present throughout the film. And here's the thing, the CGI recreation of his character doesn't even slightly resemble the actor playing him. I get that he's meant to be a statuesque figure, but were they not allowed to use the actual actor's likeness at all? It just feels like a cheap trick to try to capitalize off Jet Li's name without actually using Jet Li's appearance. The guy was being paid to do almost none of the work, but get all of the credit. Somehow they turned the Mummy into a Jet Li vehicle without Jet Li in the driver's seat, which is a major problem in its own right, but also because of this, we never get a real understanding of his character past a basic level. We're shown his story in the opening, but through the rest of the movie, he's just evil statue man, with no discernible personality or character, which would always be a problem. But it's an even bigger problem when the last movies gave us Imhotep, and an actor giving a performance that I would argue is just as important to the movies as the franchise lead. He was such an integral part of those movies. He could be hammy and over the top, but he could also be menacing and threatening. He was an amazing recurring rogue. Impossible to be replaced. And even in the second movie, when he was taking a backseat to Dwayne Johnson, he still played a part and made moments more memorable. As far as I'm concerned, a backseat was still a seat reserved. But here, he's just forgotten. And in his place is a guy who wasn't even at the place to begin with. This isn't a knock on Jet Li at all. I've been a fan of his work for many, many years, going all the way back to one of the worst Lethal Weapon movies. But they didn't give him anything to work with. And he was just barely working in the movie as is. Point blank, you can't replace something great with the absence of anything at all. Also, as the character has now aged, Alex was recast, with actor Luke Ford taking over the role from Freddie Both, which was fair enough on its own. This was about a character following in his father's footsteps, trying to become a better adventurer, and maybe in some ways even trying to become a better man.
You really are Rick O'Connell's son.
Yeah, well, hopefully after today, you'll be known as Alex O'Connell's father.
But did they have to make the guy such a Dick Grayson? He also doesn't come across as the same character, which makes sense as they are at least a decade apart, but they don't even share the same accent. The first Alex was painstakingly British, whereas this one is very much American.
My dad is going to kick your ass.
How do you think this is gonna work then? You two show up, tell me what to do?
So it never really registers as him being the same person. And sure, I know it's not, but it is supposed to be. Was it really too much to ask for a little bit of continuity? Speech aside, the recast was mostly understandable for the story that was being told. But what was much less understandable, and understandably upsetting for audiences at the time, was the recast of the series' leading lady. Rachel Weisz didn't agree to return to the role. So in her place was Maria Bello. And not that there was anything wrong with this performance, it's just that she's the wrong person. She doesn't come off as the same Evie from the past projects. She wasn't who audiences watched in the first 2 installments. It wasn't her relationship with Rick O'Connell that audiences fell in love with. And truth be told, much like her on-screen son, she just point-blank doesn't feel like the same character.
Honestly, I can say she's a completely different person.
So, to the actress's credit, her performance wasn't bad. It was just bad for these movies. But hey, at least they got her brother back for the shenanigans. Not that any of the goofs really land this time around, but at least it seems like somebody was trying. The one thing I actually almost like in this movie is Jonathan running a casino in China called Emoteps. That's actually kind of funny and something right up the character's alley. But go figure, after researching this, I found out that that was actually a recycled plot point from the second movie. It just didn't make the final cut that time around, so got reused here. Which is really telling of the big problem of this movie for me. What works about this movie is stuff that was made for the previous entries. The new stuff from this movie is why people don't like this movie. The series usually introduced pretty interesting side characters, where even if they were just given a scene or two, those scenes would stick with you. That's not really the case here, though. All of the side characters are widely forgettable, and even the new lead they introduce in Lynn
It's lean.
doesn't do much and doesn't make much of an impression. To be fair, she doesn't really have much of a part to play. I understand why she's pivotal for the plot, but she's not impactful to the story overall. She's the love child of the Emperor's general and the immortal sorceress that cursed him. She's also the love interest of Alex, but as a character, she's nothing. We don't know much about her. She's underwritten and underestablished. I would actually argue that her mother is a much more well-rounded character than she is. And she's not even a main character. There's also some odd choices I just have to comment on, like the introduction of Yetis. I don't know what they were going for, and somehow it seems like a step too far for the Mummy franchise. Undead corpses of past pharaohs? Sure. Abominable snowmen? Yeah, I don't know. That's just not realistic to me. I can't for certain say why, but they just feel out of place. It could just be me, but that's my 2 cents. From a technical standpoint, there's also some pretty bad ADR. This movie is shot in a way that makes it feel cheap. Like they're desperately trying to emulate what made the first 2 great, but they're doing it on a budget, or just, for whatever reasons, don't have the means of accomplishing it, and the plot just kind of plodded along. Runtime-wise, this is the shortest in the franchise, but it at times felt like it was the longest. And maybe that's because there's so little actually going on, and there's even less to look forward to. The last installment was panned by critics and general audiences alike, beloved by no one and begrudged by all. Which is probably why, with the talks of a Mummy revival moving forward, they're talking about bringing back the original cast, and apparently doing so by retconning this movie out of continuity, acting like the whole thing was about as canon as the animated Mummy TV series. Which, by the way, if you ever wanted to hear me talk about that, let me know in the comments. If I'm being honest, I don't think the last movie is actually as bad as people say, but it's still a far fall from grace when compared to the first 2. The jokes weren't funny, the action scenes weren't fantastical, the story was underestablished, but even in saying all that, the third movie isn't necessarily horrible. It isn't egregiously bad, but it's also just not much of anything at all. I don't watch this movie and get disgusted by its atrocity. Don't get anything out of it when I do watch this movie, so I don't watch this movie. I'm numb to it. It doesn't make me laugh, I don't feel entertained, it's nothing. I don't think people remember this movie as being a total shit show, but I think that's just because people just don't remember this movie. So, with all that being said, that was the Mummy trilogy, but believe it or not, our story isn't over yet. As a matter of fact, I think this look back at the Mummy trilogy deserves a spin-off of its own, just like the Mummy franchise itself had. So if you like this video and would maybe want to join me in taking a look back at the Scorpion King franchise, and yes, I did say franchise, there is one, and believe it or not, there are more Scorpion King movies than there are Mummy movies. Yeah, So if you want to see me tackle those, let me know in the comment section below by leaving a comment saying,
And where is the mummy?
I am vengeance. I am the night, and that was V Infuso. Just remember, if you're not tuning in, then you're missing out.
So, if you like the words that came out of his mouth hole, and you too would like to become a V-generate, don't forget to like and subscribe. Thanks for watching, nerds!
And if you're not joining the fun, you're in for one bad day. And you know what they say about having one bad day?
Catch him next time. Same bat time. Same bat channel.